online arts community. Welcome back to Black Poets Then and Now. My name is Kara Roseborough, and I'm excited to talk to you today about poet, novelist, and playwright Paul Laurence Dunbar. Dunbar was born in 1872 in Dayton, Ohio, to two former slaves from Kentucky. When emancipated, his mother moved with her two sons from a previous marriage to Dayton, Ohio. His father actually escaped from slavery in Kentucky and went on to volunteer in Massachusetts for the 55th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, one of the first black units to serve in the Civil War. Dunbar had a somewhat tumultuous home life. His mother ended up leaving his father after giving birth to their second child, a daughter, who died when Dunbar was 13. Dunbar started writing from an early age. He wrote his first poem when he was 6 and gave his first recital of poetry when he was just 9 years old. Dunbar was an excellent student, and his mother was very involved in his education. She actually learned to read just for the purpose of helping Dunbar at school, with the hopes that he would become a minister. At one point, Dunbar aspired to become a lawyer, but he was never able to afford law school. In high school, Dunbar was president of the school's literary society, a debate club member, and in 1888, at just 16 years old, he published his first two poems, Our Murdered Soldier and On the River, in the Herald, a local newspaper. In 1889, Dunbar actually dropped out of school for a year and started the Dayton Tatler, the first African-American weekly newspaper. He wrote and edited the publication, and then his friend Orville Wright published it. At first, Wright was able to publish the newspaper on credit, but he was unable to sustain this business model. As such, there are only 3 known publications of this newspaper. For a short time, Dunbar worked as an elevator operator, facing lots of racism and discrimination that actually hindered him in his work. About a year later, he asked Wilbur and Orville Wright to publish his first collection of poetry. They weren't able to do so, but they pointed him to the United Brethren Publishing House. In 1893, Dunbar published his first collection of poetry. Oak and Ivy is split up into 2 parts. Oak was written in traditional verse, while Ivy was written in what is called the Negro dialect, or the African American vernacular, which is language of the antebellum South and plantation culture. Dunbar received critical acclaim for Oak and Ivy and gained the attention of Hoosier poet James Whitcomb Riley, attorney Charles A. Thatcher, and psychiatrist Henry A. Tobey. Tobey, among others, offered to help Dunbar financially. He also offered to help distribute his book in Toledo. Thatcher offered to send Dunbar to law school, although Dunbar declined in order to continue pursuing his writing. Thatcher and Tobey were actually instrumental financial contributors that helped publish Dunbar's second volume of work, Majors and Minors. Despite frequently publishing work, receiving critical acclaim, and often doing readings, Dunbar struggled to support himself and his mother financially. He was known for being a reckless spender, and by the 1890s he was in debt. His luck turned around when novelist William Dean Howells gave his second book a positive review in Harper's Weekly. This put a national spotlight on Dunbar's work. With this new fame, Dunbar went on to publish his first and second book together as one volume, entitled Lyrics of Lowly Life. In the 1890s, Dunbar also explored short story and novel writing. His first collection of short stories, Folks from Dixie, was critically acclaimed and called a harsh examination of racial prejudice. His first novel, The Uncalled, was not as critically acclaimed, but it's known as one of the first books by an African-American author to cross the color line and talk exclusively about white society. Dunbar went on to tour England promoting his work, and he gave many public readings in the London circuit. During his time in Europe, he met composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who set Dunbar's work to music. When Dunbar returned to the United States, he married Alice Ruth Moore, later known as Alice Dunbar Nelson. She was also a poet, as well as a journalist and political activist, and she was a key figure in the Harlem Renaissance, which we will talk about next week. The two moved to Washington, D.C., where Dunbar accepted a job with the Library of Congress. This was short-lived. Dunbar was not very happy, and his wife convinced him to quit and focus on his writing. Unfortunately, in 1900, Dunbar contracted tuberculosis. In 1904, he moved back to Dayton, Ohio to be close to his mother. 2 years later, in 1906, Dunbar died at the age of 33. Dunbar's work continues to be a staple in the canon of American poetry, and I'm excited to talk to you about two of his works today.
Out in the sky, the great dark clouds are massing. I look far out into the pregnant night where I can hear a solemn booming gun and catch the gleaming of a random light that tells me that the ship I seek is passing, passing. My tearful eyes, my soul's deep hurt are glassing, for I would hail and check that ship of ships. I stretch my hands, imploring, cry aloud. My voice falls dead a foot from mine own lips, and but its ghost doth reach that vessel passing, passing. O earth, O sky, O ocean, both surpassing. O heart of mine, O soul that dreads the dark. Is there no hope for me? Is there no way that I may sight and check that speeding bark, which out of sight and sound is passing, passing?
All right, let's unpack. There are so many elements of poetry that exist in this poem, and that's why I'm really excited to look at it today. It's kind of off the beaten path in terms of Dunbar work, but really worth looking at. To start, I want to look at symbolism in this poem. The ships represent hope and opportunity, and these ships are passing by. A metaphor, another element of poetry, for opportunities, hope, passing by the speaker. Paul Laurence Dunbar also uses personification in this poem. He gives his own voice, or rather the speaker's voice, because he doesn't actually say, I, Paul Laurence Dunbar. He gives the speaker's voice an action of falling. Voices don't technically fall, but it brings another human element to this external force here. It also conveys Dunbar's futile efforts and really conveys this sense of longing, need to give up, that are part of the tone and the mood of the poem, yet another element. However, another element of that is the lingering sense of hope, which is beautifully conveyed in this poem. Next, we'll look at Dunbar's use of repetition. There are two key things to look at here. At the end of each stanza, in the fifth line, you see passing, passing. This emphasizes, of course, the passing of the ships, the passing of these opportunities, and even kind of the movement away from hope. It also gives it a somewhat musical, sing-songy element, which is really indicative of Dunbar's work overall. A lot of his work lends itself really well to music. Another repeated element in this poem are the different exclamations of O. O earth, O sky, O ocean. He's looking out to these external forces. And then he turns internal. He goes, O heart, O soul. So he's looking outward and then looking inward for these answers. These exclamations are going out and they're going in. There's just as much exasperation both ways. Last but not least, the rhyme scheme. You may have noticed that this is written in an A, B, C, B, A structure. So the first and fifth line rhyme, the second and fourth line rhyme, and then the middle one, line C, the kind of meat of the sandwich, stands on its own. I personally really like this rhyme structure because it just breaks up the rhyme scheme a little bit. It feels like a surprise the first time you read it when those sounds come back at the end of the stanza. So now that we've looked at ships that pass in the night, we're going to look at a Negro love story.
Heard the wind blow through the pine. Jump back, honey, jump back. Mockingbird was singing fine. Jump back, honey, jump back. And my heat was beating so when I reached my lady's door that I could not bear to go. Jump back, honey, jump back. Seen my lady home last night. Jump back, honey, jump back. Held her hand and squeeze it tight. Jump back, honey, jump back. Heard her sigh, a little sigh. Seen a light gleam from her eye. And a smile go flitting by. Jump back, honey, jump back. Put my arm around her waist. Jump back, honey, jump back. Raised her lips and took a taste. Jump back, honey, jump back. Love me, honey, love me true. Love me well as I love you. And she answered, 'cause I do. Jump back, honey, jump back.
All right, let's break it down. As you can see linguistically, this is a very different poem from the first poem that we read. The first one was written in traditional verse. In this one, Dunbar uses the Negro dialectic or African American vernacular that was very popular for Black writers to use at the time. He uses a lot of contractions and dashes to help the reader either mentally or verbally take on the dialect of the speaker. The poem uses an A-B rhyme structure. It's not exact. For instance, you might have night and by, which sound similar but aren't exactly rhyming. These are approximate rhymes. We get a sense of musicality in this poem. The use of the refrain, "Jump back, honey, jump back," is repeated throughout each stanza and throughout the poem overall. It gives it a musical sensibility, which again, we often find in Dunbar's work. Thank you so much for tuning in to watch this segment on Paul Laurence Dunbar. Dunbar was such an influential figure in American literature as a poet, a short story writer, a novelist, a playwright. He even wrote the lyrics to the first Black musical written and performed by Black artists on Broadway called In Dahomey. It's so great to revisit his work and to keep his legacy alive. I hope you enjoyed this segment, and I'll see you next week for another edition of Black Poets Then and Now. Bye!